you guys. Time once again for Flickers of Fear. Yes, even though it's Halloween week, I'm doing these as well, like in addition to all the extra ones that I'm doing. So hope you guys appreciate all of these movie reviews that I'm doing. But yeah, so this movie right here, I kind of feel like this movie sort of occupies the same space as Insidious and some of the other kind of like James Wan movies. But I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't know how much of a hot take this is, but honestly, I think this movie, I liked Insidious, don't get me wrong, but I actually think this movie was better. And I definitely think it was scarier. And I think a lot of that is down to, well, it's down to a lot of things, actually. I really, really like the concept of it. I really like the acting in it, the fact that it's kind of like taken very seriously. It's sort of like, you know, more of like a family, like an older kind of family dynamic. There's a lot of kind of emotional resonance in it as well. And I gotta say, I really, really like the addition of the old films in it. I think that really gave it something extra. And of course, I am talking about the movie Sinister from 2012. Now, the director of this was Scott Derrickson, who I think also did The Exorcism of Emily Rose, among other things, which is actually a pretty decent flick. I liked that. He also co-wrote it. And the other co-writer on it was a dude named C. Robert Cargill. Now, apparently, the idea for Sinister came from a nightmare that he had after seeing The Ring in 2002, which, no judgment, because I'm going to say I saw The Ring in 2002 in the theater, and that gave me nightmares too. And most horror movies don't, but there was something like super creepy about that one. So see, Robert Cargill has said, you know, I had a nightmare after seeing The Ring in which I went up into the attic of my house and found a box full of old films, and one of the films had like a family hanging on it. So the opening shot of this film, which is a really great, intriguing opening shot, is just this grotty old film of a whole family, and they all have hoods over their heads, and they're standing like by this tree, and it's daytime or whatever. Somebody's obviously filming them from far away, and they're all standing there, and then all of a sudden this branch, which has been partially cut through, like falls and kind of pulls everybody up, and they're just kind of like very slowly struggling as they, you know, suffocate to death. So it's like a really, really creepy opening scene, and it really kind of sucks you in immediately. I will say too that, I mean, that being the best aspect of it, gonna say the second best aspect of it, I think, is the casting of Ethan Hawke. Now, what I heard, I mean, I've always liked Ethan Hawke as an actor. He's one of those guys that you don't really necessarily think of like out of the gate. It's like he's not super well known. I mean, he's well known, obviously, but he's not, you know, one of those go-to big A-list kind of actors, but he's always like really solid, and he's kind of one of those guys that when you put him in your movie, it like classes up the joint, and he definitely does that with this, because I really, really like his acting performance in this. I will say too that Vincent D'Onofrio is in this as well, although his role, he always classes the joint up too, because I love him, but his role pretty much in this is just kind of like an extended cameo. I think they just shot all his scenes in one day, but you know, that's not to denigrate or anything like that, but I just really like that they were able to get such great acting talent into this film, and I think it's one of the things that like really elevates it maybe above some of the other kind of like more generic sort of horror movies. I do kind of feel like the marketing for this, like the poster, maybe the trailer. I don't actually remember the trailer. I remember seeing a couple of other reviews that complained that the trailer gave pretty much the whole movie away, but I can't really speak to that because I don't really remember if I ever even saw the trailer, which, you know, if it does give the whole movie away, that kind of sucks. But horror's better when you don't necessarily know what you're getting in for. But I think the marketing for this, they were trying to, you know, marketed along the same lines as, like I said, like Insidious or like some of the James Wan movies, which, like I said, I like those, but they do have a sort of generic quality to them that I can't quite put my finger on. Even though they're good movies, they're always just kind of like, to me, they've always been kind of forgettable. But the first time that I saw Sinister, I'm not saying like it didn't make me like shit my pants or anything like that, but I was like, man, that was like a cut above. You know what I mean? It's like, for being marketed like it was one of those kind of James Wan type movies, I'm like, it does have aspects of that. Like, it does have a few jump scares that probably need to be in there and stuff like that. But, you know, it does adhere to some of the same tropes as those. But there's just some quality about it, or some series of qualities about it, that it's hard for me to like articulate or put my finger on, but it really does like elevate it. I don't know if it's like the way it's shot, like the editing. There's just all of these sort of factors that came together and made this like a really satisfying, creepy, entertaining, and I really liked the premise behind it too. So I really, this one I remembered a lot more than some of the other ones like Insidious, or even The Conjuring, like the first Conjuring, which, like I said, I feel like a lot of people talk about The Conjuring as being like, you know, the best one from this ilk, I guess. But I would argue too, maybe, that I think Sinister is maybe better than The Conjuring as well. I mean, I certainly remembered it a lot more, and I don't know, it's kind of like, the thing about Sinister is that the idea behind it, you know, it's not super believable, you know, that it would work out like this, and it's a little bit convoluted. But I think that the acting performances and the way it's shot and the way it's like taken so seriously, it's a very adult horror movie, and not in the sense of like porn or anything, but it's just like a very adult, like it takes itself very seriously, but not to an extent where it's just stupid. You know what I mean? It's taking the material seriously. So I think that helps, you know, when the stuff gets like really supernatural, like toward the end, you buy it because it seems like a natural progression. It doesn't seem like, oh, come on now, like that's ridiculous. I mean, your mileage may vary. Maybe some people, when they saw where it was going, were just like, yeah, no, I'm not going on that journey. But I was totally hooked, and I was just kind of like, all right, I'm gonna roll with this. And I think, like I said, it's a great idea, and it's not one that you see done a lot. It's kind of like a variation of something that's been done before, but a little bit of a fresh take on it, which I thought was kind of cool. So what we have, Ethan Hawke is playing this guy who's named Ellison Oswalt, obviously named after Harlan Ellison and Patton Oswalt, which, you know, nobody made a secret of that. And he is a true crime writer. Now, 10 years ago, he wrote a very, very popular true crime novel, or it was not a novel, it's like a true crime book, I think it was called Kentucky Blood. And it got on the New York Times bestseller list. He was on interviews with TV and everything like that. And so he was kind of like, oh, his fortune's made. He's a star now and all this other stuff. However, his books after that didn't do as well. And at this point, he's still making a living at it, but he's kind of getting broke. And so he's really looking to not only recapture his lost glory, like how famous he was for, 5 minutes in time back 10 years ago, but he's also trying to like write that one book that's going to make him his fortune and and provide for his family. He has a wife and 2 kids, and and will solve all their problems essentially. So his plan, which he goes through without telling all the entire details to his wife and kids, is that he's moving from their house where they did live to this house in Pennsylvania where an entire family has been murdered. Well, 4 of them are murdered, like the mom and dad, 2 of the kids, but one of the daughters, named Stephanie, is still missing, and no one knows where she is. Presumed dead, but they don't really know where she is. So he decides that his next project is that he's going to move into the house where this crime occurred, where the whole family was hanged from a tree in the backyard. The house comes up on the market, and he gets the bright idea that we're going to move into that exact very house, and I'm going to investigate this crime, and we'll see what we can come to. One of the things that they kind of talk about a lot in the course of the film is that in some of his prior books, he's actually come up with some stuff that the police missed, and he's kind of like shitting on the cops a little bit. So when he moves to this town where this still unsolved crime is, on the books, it happened like a year or 2 prior, the cops are not super happy to see him. Not only because a lot of them have read his stuff and are kind of like, yeah, you don't seem to like cops all that much. You think we're idiots who don't know our ass from a hole in the ground. But there was one prior book that he wrote that apparently like some evidence that he came up with like ended up, they don't really go into specifics of this, but ended up getting someone off that it turned out was actually guilty. So the cops are not all that jazzed about him being there. Now, his wife and kids, they know that he's moved here. He's moved his family here for the sake of a new book that he's working on. What they don't know is that this is the actual house where the mass murder occurred. And he's very, he's really evasive about this, because at one point, I guess he's done this kind of thing before, but he's never moved into the actual house. He's always moved into like a house that was like on the same street or something, so he could like research it easier, kind of get the vibe or the lay of the land or whatever. Because at one point, his wife straight up asked him, this isn't one of those times where you moved us into a house like a couple doors down. And he's like, no, absolutely not, which technically is true. But it's not 2 doors down. This is the actual house. She doesn't figure that out until later, but it actually kind of gets told her. But he's kind of keeping it from her because he's just so convinced that this book is just going to be this is going to make his fortune and his fame, and everything's going to be fine from there on out. So they move into this house, and pretty much immediately he hears something up in the attic, or he goes up in the attic, and there's nothing up there except for this one box. And inside of this box, he also finds a scorpion, which at first it doesn't really seem like that means anything, but it does actually end up tying into the mythology later on. So he finds this box, and inside this box are a bunch of Super 8 films and a projector. Now, he's very curious about this. Who could have left this here? You know, was it the last people? I mean, obviously the last people that lived here are dead, but it's like he couldn't figure out like who left him here. So he figures, what the hell, I'm going to watch these. So the one little reel that's called, what is it called? Family Hanging Out 2011. And I was like, oh boy, this is not going to be good. Is the movie that we saw from the very, very beginning. It's just this Super 8 footage of at first it's kind of like a family doing normal family shit, but it's somebody like from the bushes, like filming them like as though someone had been stalking them. And then at the very end of the film is the thing with them hanging and someone filming it. Now, obviously, he's like, okay, well, this is evidence of the crime that was committed. Who was filming this? Is this the killer? He thinks about calling the cops, but then he's like, well, maybe not, because maybe I can research this myself and I can figure out some shit that the cops didn't figure out, because he's already had a confrontation with the sheriff of the town, who, as I said, is not really, really happy about him being there, thinks it's in very, very bad taste that he moved into that house. And also he's like, you know, you think cops are idiots and that we don't figure. And honestly, the cop says from the beginning, he's like, look, that little girl that's still missing, you know, I'm sure she's dead. This is probably something that we should just like leave alone. And it turns out he was right about that, but of course, Ellison is not going to have it. So obviously there's a whole bunch of other Super 8 films in there, and because the first one's called, you know, The Family Hanging Out, and they ended up actually being hanged and dead, it's a snuff film. So the other titles of the other reels starts to become ever more ominous. Like one of them is called Family Barbecue, one of them's called Pool Party, and you know, so like I think one of them's called Lawn Care. So you can imagine what is on some of these movies. But of course, since he thinks this book is just going to, you know, be the end all be all, he decides that he's going to like watch all these movies, which, like I said, are snuff movies. These movies are, I think, like the best part about Sinister, because they actually shot them. They wanted it as realistic as possible. So they actually shot them on actual Super 8 stock and with an actual Super 8 camera, like from back in the day when it would have been done. And they did everything like in camera. There's not, that's the cool thing about this, is there's not really, I mean, this movie only cost like $3 million to make. So there's not like a lot of CGI. Like I said, there are some kind of cheesy jump scares, which, you know, I'm not a fan of, but I'll give this movie a pass because so much of it is just like so well done, and it doesn't really concentrate, and it doesn't, you know, it doesn't lean too much into, you know, quiet, blam, you know what I mean? It's not, you know, it has a couple things like that, but it's not overdone like some of the other kind of more James Wan ones are, which, like I said, just kind of gets on my nerves. But yeah, so he watches all these films. And basically, you know, the one that's Pool Party is all of these people like tied to these lawn chairs, and they get like dragged into the pool and drowned. And during this particular film, he's watching it, and he sees like a little, what looks like kind of like a weird face. And it looks like the person whose face this is, even though the face is kind of fucked up, it looks like a mask or something. It looks like this person is like standing under the water, like in the pool, while these people are being dragged into the pool and drowned. So he's like, well, okay, that's really odd. And then when he goes back and watches all the other films, the creepiest of which is Lawn Care, because that's kind of like, it's somebody, like, it's at night and somebody starts up a lawnmower and it's going across the yard. There's just like one little light like in the center, and then all of a sudden bam, there's like a person there, and like the lawnmower goes over them. Now, I will say this movie, there's not a lot of gore in it, and I kind of like that. It's sort of like restrained. Even some of the worst shit from the movie, like when the tied up woman gets run over with the lawnmower, you can kind of see it, but you only see it in the reflection of Ethan Hawke's glasses. So like, I thought that was kind of like elegant, like the way they did that, you see the movie of like people's throats getting cut and stuff like that, but you only see it like in a reflection of his eyes. So it's almost kind of like you're seeing everything through his horrified gaze. So I thought that was like a really effective thing that they did. Now, obviously, because all of these films were left there and they're all the same thing, he's like, okay, well, all of these crimes are obviously connected, and they all happened in different cities, and they happened like a really long time apart, like in time. So nobody thought to link them together because, it didn't have the same MO or anything like that. It's like, there'd be one where there's a whole entire family died because they were all drugged and tied up in their car, and then the killer like set their car on fire. But he's like, the more he researches, he's like, in every single case, like the whole family was wiped out except for one person, like one of the kids, and that kid was never found. So that was kind of like, the only thing that linked all of these crimes together. And the crimes, the oldest one goes back to 1966, and at this point it's 2012. So he actually, despite like his, the cops not really being fans of his, there actually is one younger deputy who I don't think he's ever given a name. He just calls him Deputy So-and-so just because of a conversation that they have. But the Deputy So-and-so is like a fan of his. So he agrees. He's like, well, I can't tell the sheriff that I'm helping you because he'd get mad. But he's like, I really want to help you with your book because I want to be in the acknowledgments. And he wants to be Deputy So-and-so, like for his help on the book. So he actually does agree to look into some shit for him. So the two of them start to put together all of the links of these. Now, another thing that he notices too, other than this creepy figure seemingly being in the background of all the films, which significantly means that this is not necessarily the killer, because then who's filming the stuff? So there's that whole thing too. That's like another layer. So as they start to kind of look into it, there also start to be what look like occult trappings, because not only is one kid missing from each scene, which is never found, they also have this weird, this weird face that seems to turn up in all of them. And then there's also like this weird symbol that looks like an occult symbol. It's not like a pentagram or anything like that, but it looks like an occult sort of symbol. So at this point, Ellison is led to kind of like this professor of anthropology or, occult studies or whatever, who's played by Vincent D'Onofrio. He's there to provide some exposition about what this occult thing means. Like, he's been brought in by the cops before, like on occult type crimes. So what he finds out, he's like, this is actually like pretty obscure. You don't really see much of this. But apparently this symbol is indicative of this, not exactly a demon, but he's like a pagan deity of some kind called Bagul. And he's this guy, he was like a child eater, was able to manifest through images. And this goes back like way to before the Middle Ages and stuff. So every time if you like drew a picture of him or something like that, it would like manifest him. And he could sort of come through images, and he would wipe out a family, and then he would take one child from the family and kind of keep it so he could like feed off its soul. So that's essentially what the mythology of this is. I don't think Bagul is like a real demon or a real entity or anything like that. It was just one that was invented for the movie. But I think it's like actually a really good idea. And I also really liked the idea of it being able to come through images, and there being images of it that the more images of it there are, it's like the more powerful it is. So at some points during the film, like I said, as it starts going more from like an investigation into a serial killer, which is kind of how it starts out, and it starts going like in more and more supernatural directions, in the sense that, Bagul, who the kids in the, they call him like Mr. Boogie. There's all these little drawings, and that's what they call him. So he's like the boogeyman, is that he's able to kind of come out through, because there's a few scenes where he has like a close up of one of the films, like with Bagul there, it's like his face, and it's a still, but then like it moves, and he's also able to come in and out of the film. So like I said, he's sort of like not necessarily like a demon, but sort of like demonic, in the sense that he can manifest himself in the real world, like through images of him, which is why he's always appearing on the camera. And then I guess like prior to the families being killed, or prior to him deciding which kid that he's going to take, he always kind of like sort of like starts possessing them or taking them over and getting them to draw pictures of him, which is something that happens too with Ellison's family, because he has kind of an older son and a younger daughter. The older son, I guess prior to this, has had problems with night terrors, and they had gone away, but when they move into this house, even though he hasn't told his family that this is a murder house, he starts having them like really, really bad. And also the little girl seems to be drawing things, and also the older boy is drawing things like that he probably wouldn't have known, like details of the crime and stuff like that. So obviously like Bagul is kind of infiltrating their minds, and like while he's deciding which one to go for to take over and then like wipe the family out. Another thing they find out too, like Ellison and the cop, is that there's a pattern. Not only is this, the same thing where it's a whole family that's wiped out in a weird way, and then one kid is missing and never found, but there's also a pattern where the person, like whoever moves into the house, like after the family died, like they move into the house where the last family died. And then when they move to a new house, then they all get killed. So it's kind of like goes across. I know it's kind of complicated to like lay it out. So what ends up happening is that Ellison, who has had all these problems with his family because, understandably, he's getting so obsessed with this case and this, this house, that he's drinking a lot, and he's, because he's getting really fucked up, and he's starting to see things, like sees apparitions and stuff in his house, and he doesn't really want to tell his wife about it. His wife finds out that this is the actual murder house, so she gets like super pissed off, and she's basically like, look, you don't even care about us, you don't care that that this is affecting our family in this horrible way, you just give a shit about your book. And he denies this, but it's pretty clear that that's all he does care about. So in some ways, I think that Ethan Hawke struck like a really good balance in this movie, because he could very well have been a very, very unlikable character. He certainly is a very selfish character, in the sense that even though he sort of makes noises toward, I write true crime because, I want to find justice for the victims. These kids are missing, or, I want to find murderers that the cops couldn't find. And maybe he does believe that. But you can tell that he's very willing, that really he just kind of wants to be famous. I mean, he had like taped all of his old TV interviews and stuff, and he rewatches them and things like that, trying to relive the glory days, like back when he was #1 bestseller on New York Times and stuff. So it's like, yeah, he might be writing for the victims, but he's mostly just writing for himself. And the fact that he's willing to put his family in that much danger, even after he suspects that something supernatural is going on, just kind of like leans into. But in that sense, even though he's unlikable in that sense, he's still like a really compelling, and you still feel sympathetic toward him, even in his selfishness, he's still a relatable, realistic character. And I think like the interactions between him and his wife, like after she finds out that this is the house where the murders happened, and her just like confronting him with like, all you give a shit about is your book, like, your son is, his night terrors are returning, he's not getting any sleep, and he's all fucked up, and everybody's making fun of them at school because they all know we moved into this house, and it's like everybody hates us. And and him just trying to like justify it, and they're just like screaming at each other. It was just like a really, really powerful scene, I thought. And like I said, there's a lot of emotional investment with the characters in this one, even though he has like some terrible things about him, you still like feel for him, you know what I mean? Which I think is like a really good, and I think that he was like the perfect actor to be in this movie because he really lends it a real weight and his character is real complicated, but you still like want to watch him and you still really don't want anything bad to happen to him. So at one point, like once he figures out what exactly is going on with this whole supernatural shit, and once he actually believes it, he actually does do the smart thing and he burns all the films, and he's just like, fuck this book, I'm not doing this. My family is actually in danger, we're getting the fuck out of here. So I guess they still owned the old house, they hadn't sold it yet, so he just like wakes him up in the middle of the night, he burns the projector and everything, and he says to his wife, it's like the middle of the night, he's like, pack the kids up, we're getting the fuck out of here. It's just that there's no book, I just fuck it. So she's like, of course, over the moon, she's super happy about it. However, what he didn't know prior to this was what I just mentioned, that when the families get murdered, it's not when they're in the same house as the last family that got murdered. It's when they move to another house. That's when it happens. So by taking his family back to his old house, he's actually become the next link in the chain without him knowing it. So when he gets back to the old house, he is horrified to discover that that all the films and the projector and everything like that are in this attic, and even though he burned them all, they're still there, and he's like, oh shit, I'm super fucked now. And it's not too much of a spoiler alert to go, he is indeed fucked, and that's kind of what happens. Like I said, I don't want to spoil exactly what happens because I don't know how many people have seen this or not. I mean, it came out a while back, it was back in 2012, but I don't know, I kind of feel like because the ones in the bigger, I keep saying like the James Wan Conjuring or universe and the movies that him and his, kind of crowd made, I kind of feel like they get all the accolades, and this one, I don't know if it's necessarily forgotten, but I feel like it's one that doesn't get as much attention as maybe Insidious or the Conjuring movies or something like that. And I think that's a shame because honestly, I think this one is better. I think this one's at least more memorable, and I think the addition of the creepy like Super 8 videos, the films, I mean, that really lent something. I mean, there's not a lot much more creepy than like and I find this really creepy, like going up to like your attic and finding these fucking creepy ass snuff films in there that were like old with no sound and shit. I mean, that would scare the shit out of me. So you know what I mean? That's the kind of shit that I like finding something in your house that shouldn't be there and is like really not kosher. So I think for me that's like a really, really creepy thing, more than, and yes, it has a supernatural element. Yes, you do have to suspend your disbelief because it is this convoluted mythology, but I mean, props to them for trying to do something like a little bit different than, oh, it's just a ghost of a murdered person or it's just a demon or whatever. I mean, they actually did come up with a whole mythology surrounding it, and I thought it was like really cool and really original. So, there's that too. It actually did, I think it only cost $3 million to make, for Christ's sake, and ended up being quite successful. Like, it made a shit ton of money. So successful that they made a Sinister 2. Now, I can't speak to Sinister 2. I have not seen it, but it seems like, at least in the horror community, it seems like the overriding, opinion is that it was really, really shitty. And, because it kind of seemed like they were trying to make Bagul, sort of like a new horror franchise, which, there's nothing wrong with that. Everything's got to be a franchise nowadays. I get it. That's the business model. But I kind of feel like maybe they were trying to force it a little bit too much. And one criticism I see of the first movie too is that Bagul, the demon, looks too much like who did they say he looked like? Like one of those wrestlers, like the Undertaker or something like that. Well, he used the makeup, like the makeup for it is sort of reminiscent of kind of like the corpse makeup from like Norwegian black metal bands and stuff. Not exactly like that, but that's kind of what he was using for inspiration. So I can see, like, it's not the scariest, monster ever, but like I said, that's fine. And honestly, I don't think it has to be all that scary because I think that the other things about this, like the relationships between the family characters, the whole mystery of it, and particularly that creepy fucking, those creepy Super 8 films of the families getting killed are just way, way creepy enough. And I like, and the fact that they're just like suggestive rather than, you know, and the way they shot the movie, like I said, where it's just kind of like reflected, or he turns away and stuff like that. So a lot of it's kind of left to your imagination. And I think that makes it like way scarier. So honestly, I think that was scary enough to carry the whole movie. You know, maybe they showed too much of the monster, like, or Bagul, like toward the end, but like I said, it's a very, very minor criticism. I mean, overall, this is a really, really solid, really creepy horror movie, and like I said, I would argue that it is actually better than some of the ones that get a lot more praise than this one did. So if you haven't seen it, I would definitely recommend checking it out. It's on Amazon Prime. I rented it on Amazon Prime. I think it might also be on Hulu as well. I'm not entirely sure, but if you have seen it and you have opinions about it, let me know what they are in the comments. Or if you haven't seen it, you know, I'm kind of glad I didn't completely spoil the ending, but you know, if you know, you know, you'll have seen it. So yeah, so that'll do it for this Flickers of Fear, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.